Hello everyone, you're watching The World Now. Ukraine is likely to experience a little bit more stability as all 27 European leaders have now agreed to a 50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine after Viktor Orban lifted his veto. The decision was taken surprisingly fast at the beginning of an extraordinary summit in Brussels, where financial aid for Kyiv was at the very top of the agenda. The special fund, known as the Ukraine Facility, combines 33 billion euros in loans and 17 billion euros in grants and will be gradually dispersed between 2024 and 2027. Payments will be conditional on the completion of structural reforms related to public administration, good governance, the rule of law, and the fight against corruption and fraud. The facility is tied to a wider review of the bloc's common budget that includes top-ups for migration, border control, cutting-edge technologies, as well as crisis management. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has now said he was grateful to EU leaders, highlighting that the decision was taken by all 27 heads of state. He also said that the package would strengthen the long-term economic and financial stability of his country. This funding was important for Ukraine financially and because it needs Europe to stay united in its support. The EU's aid package is a little more of the stability Ukraine needs and will help it pay pensions and salaries and to keep the heating on over the next 4 years. Hundreds of European farmers bent on getting their complaints about excessive costs, rules and bureaucracy heard by EU leaders convening for a summit have blocked major thoroughfares in Brussels, driving heavy-duty tractors. They want a review of agreements such as Mercosur for imports to be subject to the same rules as European agricultural products and for the costly bureaucracy of agriculture and environmental regulations to be made more flexible and simplified. On Wednesday evening, the first tractors had already begun to pull up around the European Parliament headquarters in Brussels, and from early morning, the caravan's horns could also be heard near the European Commission's main building, opposite the Council, where European leaders are meeting. Similar actions have occurred across the bloc for most of the week, including in France, where police arrested more than 90 protesters who forced their way into Europe's biggest food market south of Paris on West End. And back to our coverage of the recent decision coming from European Union in supporting Ukraine in the 50 billion euro aid. I'm joined now by Dr. Godwin Ebe, who joins us live from Moscow in Russia. Thank you for joining this conversation at this time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you viewers for tuning in.
So EU finally agreed. You know, it's been a long way from when this decision was in the pipeline to when it finally came to fruition. How is this news resonating with stakeholders in Moscow?
Good question. Moscow is, while Moscow pursues its national strategic interest, it is not really known to. It's not really known to use hard or soft power to influence sovereign states, except there's some kind of agreement or there's some. It involves its citizens, as we see in Ukraine. They try to offer their comparative advantages, whether it's defense, whether it's energy, and of course, by doing business with other states, you have that soft power to control. But you see, Hungary is a sovereign state. The EU is a bloc of sovereign states. They reserve the right to choose whatever policy that works best for them. And but for Hungary, they've raised some issues which I think are plausible and deserve merit. Whether those issues are going to be tackled in the future is yet to be seen. But one of the issues he raised was the issue of corruption in Ukraine. the question remains, is Ukraine really corrupt or not? And the truth is that according to at least even Western publications, they consider Ukraine as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. According to the Corruption Perception Index, I think it's been ranging between 115 to 122 in the last 5 years in terms of corruption. Although I don't say this to slight Ukraine, and I take all the figures with a pinch of salt, because when I chase all the statistics, I chase the organization that does it, and it's Transparency International, which is registered in Germany. So there is no way that German politics and EU politics will not affect this organization. But all the same, I'm just putting it out there because a Western publication that considers Ukraine to be one of the most corrupt nations. So the issue raised by the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is in line and plausible. Now, if they are going to deal with that is yet to be seen. Also, he talked about the fact that it's unpredictable what will happen in the next year, in the next 4 years, and he wants it to be reviewed every year. I think that's also plausible because in war, there's a lot of information warfare and a lot of instability. So that's for them to decide. Their sovereign states, like I said, and Moscow is not interested in what they decide in their domestic affairs.
Absolutely. Viktor Orban insisted on periodic review, of this particular aid before it gets to Ukraine in the next 4 years. But when you consider that it's election year in the U.S., and the rain of money is also not likely going to keep falling like it used to, how much of a boost is this aid for Ukraine, particularly when you consider the news from last year that they had some inroad into Belgorod where some actual attack actually did take place?
Attack are you talking about? Sorry.
Belgorod, the killings of Russians in that border town on the 30th of December last year. Yes.
Yes, obviously, killing of innocent civilians, terrorism, especially that's the definition of terrorism when the target is mostly civilians, or there's indiscriminate killing that affects mostly civilians, and obviously that was terrorism that occurred on Russian soil, and it should be condemned. But obviously, in the very polarized world of today, you see condemnation coming from only one side, and we should see more condemnation for all such kind of terrorism. But the Ukraine has so much problems in this conflict because, according to the U.S., Young from the Office of Management and Budget and Management of the U.S., she says U.S. has run out of funds. She just basically says it openly. It's clear that this 54 billion has nothing, will not be enough to keep the Ukrainian economy afloat. And they even publicly say that, not to talk of reviving the industry that have died and the loss of manpower and equipment. But all the same, there are so many problems. You also have the election cycle, I think you alluded to, which the Republicans are not so keen on supporting Ukraine. Should they win? President Trump believes that Ukraine is too corrupt to help and has some ideas of ending the war in 24 hours. So there are lots of problems that money, no matter how much money you throw into it, it will not solve, and they still remain there today. And obviously, we also see change in the tone of rhetorics. Initially, with the Russian-Ukraine conflict, the West was saying we need to defeat Russian military on the field. And all of a sudden, when the counter-offensive failed, the summer counter-offensive from the Ukrainian side, they said, oh, it's a stalemate. And now they are openly saying, oh, well, maybe Ukraine has to cede some territories. Which one is it? I obviously don't know. But obviously, when a country is fighting for what it considers not just economic interest, but its survival, it sees it as a threat to its survival. The willingness of the country to invest more, the willingness and the desire of the country to invest heavily in the confrontation is much more. We can see that Russia considers it an existential threat to this conflict to Russian-speaking people, as we saw their killings in the Donbass from 2013. So I don't think this money is going to change the landscape. It's not a game changer in any way or form. But it would be nice for peace because, as I always say, the East and the West add so much value to the world. So they should come to the table and negotiation without precondition and try to find a path forward.
So I understand that Russia is fighting this war from a very strong and fortified position. But the fact that it's also entered its 708th day means that the international support Ukraine is getting is significant, whether Russia acknowledges it or not. But when you say negotiation, are you foreseeing a diplomatic way out of this, seeing how long, this battle has gone?
First of all, I'd like to correct an impression. It is not true that most of the international community supports Ukraine. That's false. Most of the international community is not G7 and NATO. That's not the whole world, unfortunately. Most of the international community are either neutral or support Russia. It's less minority that support Ukraine. And coming to so if the support is not enough, both in terms of financial assistance and military assistance, then it's a game that it's an accident waiting to happen. Now, considering the length, you talked about the length of time. Obviously, it's horrible that it's gone this long. It could have been avoided. We've seen statements from Angela Merkel of Germany and Poroshenko, who said the Minsk I and the Minsk II agreement, which was designed, co-signed, and sponsored, was just a ploy to arm Ukraine. And this kills trust among among leaders in terms of negotiation. So I personally want both the East and the West to come together on the table without precondition, with sincerity in the interest of their common citizens, not just the political.
Indeed, by the way, I didn't say most of the international community support Ukraine. I said the international support is significant enough to have made the country hang in there for 708 days. Just some clarification in that conversation. But that's our time, Dr. Ibe. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Chairman, Nigerians and Diaspora Russian Chapter, thank you for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll take a break now and we'll be back with more. Stay with us, everyone.
Sometimes it's the story that calls. At other times, the people just want to be heard.
School, I need students, but I need teachers.
Can't continue like this.
Their voices re-echoing through time itself.
We haven't done anything. If the tide is high, everybody run for safety.
Their tears leave a sweet sour taste for all their demands. A familiar call beckoning for change. In our world, no one expects a disaster to happen. But when it does, we'll be there to x-ray all sides, from the east to the west, north and south. Community Forum will examine the oddities and challenges to economic development, as well as issues yearning for government intervention. Watch fresh episodes of Community Forum on Sundays by 9:30 p.m. only on TVC News.
We head now to the Middle East, where the war in Gaza has resulted in an unprecedented level of destruction to its economy, which will take tens of billions of dollars and decades to reverse. UN Trade and Development Body made this known in a new report on Wednesday. The preliminary assessment of the social and economic impacts of the conflict examines gross domestic product loss,